educated or not. Education normally made people more alive, more alert. And when they weren't educated, they had a dull look, almost bovine. They needed that stimulation. It isn't as if adding things necessarily complicates your life. It may awaken your life. You have to understand the difference. But there were some people who were illiterate, who were very much more aware, and their expressions showed it, than people who were merely educated intellectually. And so the important thing wasn't the education so much as the enlivening, awakening of the mind. When we speak of simplicity, we don't want to speak of something only negative, because many people who give up on the one side don't take up on the other. Yogananda met a man in Phoenix, Arizona, who was dirty and disheveled, and he asked him, "Why do you go around looking like that?" He was a precursor of the hippies. And he said, "I'm a renunciate." Yogananda said, "You've renounced nothing because you're still attached to filth." I know that Ananda Mohima, who was very strong on simplicity and renunciation and so on, still used to tell her disciples to dress nicely. And she said, "We're not so poor that we have to walk around with clothes that are falling off our backs. Dress properly. If you haven't the money to buy decent clothes, then I'll get you some, or get somebody to give the money to you so you can do it." And I still remember, because I was very much in the other school when I was young. I used to go around in T-shirts till they fell off my back, almost literally, before I would buy new ones. And I never even noticed it. It wasn't as if I was doing anything deliberately. I just didn't think about it. Until the first day Rajashi came to Mount Washington and I met him. And I was standing there among all the monks with a T-shirt that was very holy but not sacred. And and he said, "Go change. You don't have to look like that." And since then I've understood that simplicity does not mean deprivation. Simplicity does not mean poverty. There's a big difference. I remember when Swami Chidananda came here many years ago, back in 69, either 69 or 70, I'm not sure, but long ago, and he went to the farm and he saw that people had left farm tools, rakes and shovels and so on, out, and that they had not put away a pile of trash. And he said something that was very true, that if you leave things like this around, it attracts low consciousness. It even attracts low entities, because you're putting out a kind of magnetism that they are comfortable with. Whereas when you have beauty, when you surround yourself with dignity, when you dress nicely without dressing in an opulent manner, this is right. It attracts higher consciousness, it attracts higher energy. And Yogananda always dressed well. He always urged us to, as a matter of respect for others, as a matter of respect for God. You don't have to make a big show, but to dress neatly, cleanly, properly. This is a part of spiritual life and is a part of the simplicity of which we're speaking today. We're not speaking of simplicity, as I said, and equating it with poverty. We're equating it with a clear mind, above all, a clear consciousness. And on the one hand, it does mean reducing your wants. As Master used to say, give up unnecessary necessities. He used that expression because so many people think that things are necessary that aren't necessary at all. So he said, go through your list of necessities and decide which ones are really necessary. Get rid of an excess baggage of them. On the one hand, but on the other hand, you have to fill your mind with a higher consciousness, which is by its very nature always simple. When I was a boy, I was given for my birthday a bicycle. and all the boys from the neighborhood, all the children, I should say, from the neighborhood came for my birthday party. And I was the oldest of the group in our neighborhood in Teliagen, Romania. And so I taught them all how to ride a bike that day. And it was a very interesting experience from many points of view. For example, from the point of view of the relationship of guru and disciple. It also is interesting from the standpoint of what we're talking about right now. I'll explain what I mean. The way that I just hit upon by inspiration, I guess, was to put the child in the seat, on the seat of the bicycle, and hold the seat and hold the handlebar, and run along with him while he pedaled furiously. And then as he began to get a sense of equilibrium, and I could feel that he wasn't leaning against me and or leaning away from me, but riding a more steady line, I would let go of the handlebar and hold the seat, so that I was still holding him. When I saw that he was still more stable, then I would let go of the seat, but run along with him for the twofold purpose of catching him if I needed to, and of giving him the confidence that really he could go on without me. And then, when I found that he was going on, then I would drop behind, and he would go on and come back shouting, "I can ride a bike, I can ride a bike," and he was very excited. And they all learned to ride a bike that day. It's a very wonderful example for how the guru helps us. At no time does the guru try to make followers. The guru tries to make other people equal with him. And his way of doing it is to help them along through his blessings, through his attunement. We receive the strength, the equilibrium, until finally we're able to run, and then we can go on by direct inspiration from within, instead of with outward guidance and outward words and outward scoldings and whatever it is that may be necessary in order to help us to understand how we should live. This is a good illustration also for achieving simplicity, that as you give up, don't think that it means a matter of just suddenly creating a void in your life. It's a gradual process. But as you, in the process of giving up, you take up, you fill yourself more and more with the consciousness of God, with the peace of God, then you begin to understand that, in fact, you don't need that in order to function on this higher level. And just as in the life of Van Gogh, who during his lifetime, if you can believe it, he sold $14 worth of paintings. One painting now is worth millions, and that poor fellow, actually it's all God's play. That's what we don't see. Think of the poor soldiers who go into battle, and they may win a glorious victory, their army may, but they themselves are dead. So have they lost or won? It seems sort of too bad that they can't be around to see the finish. Or if they've lost, to understand why they lost. Does the story really end with their death? No, it's God playing through you and me. And in a very real way, we don't have a right to the rewards of what we do, because it's His play. When we think egotistically, I have a right to the rewards, I have done it, then we get put back again and again in order to learn our lessons. I've even thought that it's fortunate for people like Van Gogh. Well, he went mad, and so I don't know how fortunate he was, but he needn't have if he had understood more perfectly the flow of inspiration. He was a great artist, but he still lacked something as a human being that would have made him a greater artist. Mozart's another example. Schubert's another example. Most of them are good examples. They aren't really known in their lifetime, and very often the boom in their works begins on the day of the news of their death. Doesn't seem fair, but I've often thought they were lucky. Because as soon as you are known, for instance, what about Walter Keane? Or actually it's his wife now claims to have done all those gumdrop-eye children. I don't know who did it, and it doesn't matter. But the point is that you get popular and famous for doing one thing, And then your public practically forces you to keep doing that, when your inspiration makes you want to break out into new things and try new ways of expressing yourself, and you keep having to do that which you're expected to do. I think in a way it's good that you have the total freedom not to have to do what anyone else asks of you or expects of you, and to be able to act as you did when you first did. What first brought you to the attention of others was because you did it from inspiration. And so Van Gogh only got $14 out of his paintings in his lifetime, and during his lifetime all those staid burghers of his town, if they called them burghers in Belgium or Holland, whichever it was, Holland I guess, they would have thought that he was a ne'er-do-well. But how many people know the name of even one of those burghers today? We all know Van Gogh. They said, what's he doing? He's not building up the richness, the wealth of this city. He's just sitting there dabbling with a bunch of colors. You see, people who are not sensitive, people who are not aware, who haven't refined their consciousness. I remember one man who talked about some men who were working on some sort of literary project. His work was always just working in the soil. And he said, why can't they do a man's work? As if a man's work was only using their muscles. The more we develop spiritually, as human beings, mentally, emotionally, whatever, the more in that development we discover that doing things physically isn't the real work. Even the physical thing is only a symbol of an energy flow. And that energy flow, when released from just physical things, can do more and more refined things that have a much deeper impact on people, to the point where, like that Swami Shantananda, he didn't do anything. And yet he did a great deal more for people than those people who are out there busily building hospitals. Like the story of Martha and Mary in the New Testament. And Martha complained and asked Jesus to scold his disciple Mary, because she was only sitting there bathing in his vibrations, in his aura. And she said, scold your disciple, rebuke your disciple, because Martha was busy working. Jesus said, Martha, you're busy and worried about so many things. Only one thing really matters. And Mary has discovered what that is. You can talk about peace, and I've seen a lot of people get very angry on the subject of peace. What kind of peace are they able to bring to others? Until you have peace in yourself, you can't bring peace to others. We have, above all, if we're going to help the world, to change ourselves. And other people are not our responsibility. We don't have to worry about them. We don't have to get upset because they're wrong. Just live in God, in yourself, and then ask God, what do you want me to do in order to express through me as you would wish? The more you can think that way. I remember, again, here's a third example from Ananda Moyima, but a very good one. One lady who was with her was doing something for the children there. And she said, is that all right? And Ma's answer was, as long as your ego isn't involved. An interesting and very beautiful answer. The more your ego's involved, the more anything you do will have some wrong repercussions, even for you, even if it's a good thing. And yes, it's better to do a good thing from egoic motives than not to do a good thing at all. But the best thing is to be in tune with that flow, and then try to act in attunement. Act from that attunement, I should say. And this is what we mean when we speak of simplicity. To gradually diminish the one side with the purpose of freeing you to get involved in the other. I have seen a lot of renunciates, a lot of people who were trying to live a divine life, who were not living anything of the kind, because all they had done was give up. like that renunciate renunciate in Phoenix that Yogananda met, who said that he was a renunciate, but he wasn't. The important thing is not what you have or don't have, what you do or don't do. It's really a matter of what you are in your heart. And it certainly helps to achieve that divine flow if you get less involved. I got a radio a few years ago, and I got interested in hearing about the news. But I found that they kept playing the news, and so I kept hearing the radio. And before I knew it, I was listening to the radio all the time for anything new that might have happened in the last half hour. And I began to realize what an absolute waste of time. And besides which, all the jingles and things that they throw at you. So I finally turned it off, and I decided it wasn't that important. But I got Newsweek. And so I read up on all the news in Newsweek until finally I discovered that it's really just gossip. If there's not anything you can do about it, then that's all it is gossip. And whereas it's all very interesting when something happens of importance, and we're all interested, I just as soon get it second or third hand. It doesn't matter that much. If I don't hear it right on the moment, it reminds me of a George Price cartoon during the Second World War, of this man sitting glued to the radio with pigeons flying in the window, and his wife is saying to somebody, it's the NBC News on the hour and the CBS News on the half hour and those damn pigeons in between. And so many people at that time were so, what's going on, what's going on? And I find that I don't really, since I haven't read the newspapers or magazines, it's not that I have a rigid principle not to, but on the whole I don't. If I happen to see one and it's interesting, I'll look at it. But after having looked at it, I think, so what's new? Usually, basically nothing. If it isn't one person being killed, it's somebody else. If it isn't one person, one country in revolution, it's another. If it isn't one disease that's taking a hold of the popular fancy, it's another. If it isn't one new art form that suddenly seized the imagination of the world, it's another. One great hot news that I read during the time that I was reading Newsweek was some breakthrough in the arts where they were using bits of string and glue, and this was their definition of the new wave in art. That kind of thing makes you think, how many miles do you have to walk to find a strawberry? It's a lot. It's quite unnecessary to read all that stuff and hear all that stuff and get involved. And sure, when the space shuttle blows up, then it's too bad. You click your tongue. If you have any sympathy, you pray for the poor departed. But to get involved in the huge controversy that's gone on ever since as to who bears the blame of it, I just as soon let other people worry about it. I don't think that I can find the answer myself, and I don't think it'll matter to me when they do. So let them do it. That's fine. The world just keeps going. It doesn't change. When you've lived a few years, and I've managed to survive a few years, this may be my only claim to fame that I'm still here, but you find that the story doesn't change very much. As the French say, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they're just the same anyway. And so, what we want to do is decide certain things that are interesting to you. I don't say you shouldn't read newspapers. I don't say you shouldn't get interested in all the things that come to you to get interested in, but at least try to cut down on doing things because other people tell you you should do them. Because most people will tell you, yeah, but you've got to be up on what's going on in the world, otherwise how can you vote? Well, the plain fact is nobody votes well anyway, practically nobody. They like his nice teeth when he smiles, and so they vote for him. Democracy is better than anything else going at the moment, but that doesn't make it the best. I think in the astral world, where they know God's will, they've got the best thing going. Now, if we are going to achieve simplicity then, we want to understand what it really means. It doesn't necessarily mean cutting out all those things. It doesn't necessarily mean decamping. I have been several times, as you all know, and I was there recently, to Kauai. It's a very beautiful, peaceful, island. People tend not to get involved in anything. And what is the result? I've seen it there again and again, that after people have lived there 3-4 years, they say, won't somebody knock me on the head to see if I'm still alive? They don't, they start going to sleep. And you look at the people there, and most of them tend to go to sleep. One man, in fact, a yoga teacher from Tokyo, told me that he settled in Honolulu because there were many Japanese there, and because it was a beautiful, simple kind of lifestyle, didn't have to dress heavily and build houses against the cold and so on. And he found that mentally he was starting to drowse after about 2 years. He blamed it on the flowers. He said that the perfume of the flowers had a drug-like effect. And it may be so, I don't know. But anyway, I have seen that when people had nothing to do and lived in too much of the outward simplicity, very often it does put them to sleep. I mean, what is the typical concept that we all have of hillbillies? People who ain't got nothing, and they don't do nothing neither. And they just sort of sit there and chaw. Well, what do we really want then? We don't necessarily want to simplify our lives just on this level. It's a much more subtle argument than that. One of the most interesting and, in this context, relevant sentences in the Bhagavad Gita is one of those sentences that you sort of pass over and don't think about. And it's like the phrases that you need to use in any kind of writing to get from here to there, but they don't really say what's here or what's there. They just sort of move you, like the conjunctive and, which doesn't seem to say very much in itself, although in fact you can make quite a lecture on the very subject and. Want me to try? Well, okay, I'll tell you a little bit. Most people think either or. Why not both and? Why keep trying to distinguish? That ties in with the topic, doesn't it? Because when we complicate life by this or that, we're always making choices, and we're seeing oppositions and distinctions and analyzing. We don't have any peace. It's when we see both and, when we see everything as a part of a flow, that it becomes a much more harmonious life for us. And whereas with Western thinking, born of the teaching, in fact, of Aristotle, the logical the rules of logic that he gave, that a thing is either this or that, it can't be by definition both or neither. It has to be either or. And by our education, we have reached the point where this is so natural to our way of thinking that we can't really imagine that you can think another way. It was an interesting experience for me when I went to India and found that people could disagree with me without calling me wrong. And I used to get exasperated because I was so much into the Western logic that I thought, well, can't you make up your mind? Don't you have enough clarity to decide which is right? They were saying, well, no, both are right, depends on the context. Finally, I began to understand that their whole civilization is based on the idea of both and, of bringing things together. And this has been the exasperation of every religious missionary that's gone to India for thousands of years, that they're always perfectly willing to accept the Christian missionaries and Christ, of course, he's the Son of God, why not? Yet they keep on worshipping Rama. Why not? This is our religion. They think both and. There was this whole village in Bihar that was converted by some Catholic to the Christian religion, and they were perfectly happy. They call them rice Christians. They bring them rice, and they think, all right, well, we'll be Christians if this is the way to get food. But anyway, he came back after a few months, and he found that they were all sitting around singing Ram Nam, the name of Rama. And he said, what are you doing? They looked at him dumbfounded. They said, but this is our religion. What do you mean? Rama's our. So they added Christ. That didn't mean they had to remove Rama, because basic to their way of thinking is both and it's a very sophisticated thought. So even the conjunctive and can be an important word. In this case, the sentence of passage is that statement in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Our side is easy to count. Their side is difficult to count. And it doesn't seem to mean anything, but it means a great deal, because what we're talking about is the qualities of consciousness that are on the side of good, and that is to say, those qualities that lead us toward divine consciousness, and those qualities that involve us in delusion. Those that are closer to God are simple and few. The virtues are not many, and they all are basically, you might say, ramifications of the single virtue of love. Whereas the ways of getting into delusion are an infinity there are an infinity of them. What with ego and jealousy and pride and anger and hatred, and it just goes on and on and on. When we simplify our consciousness and our lives, we are coming closer to God, or putting it the other way around, as we come closer to God, our lives and our consciousness become simplified automatically. We could get into a sort of a more exact explanation of how this happens by understanding first that everything comes out from God. Everything manifests from Him, and yet it's all He. It isn't really separate from Him, because He's the only reality, and all these things, rocks and trees and bushes and bodies and egos and thoughts and feelings, all of these things are really merely manifestations, expressions of divine consciousness. God was one and decided to enjoy Himself through many, so the scriptures say. How did He do it? How did He manifest Himself as duality? Well, He manifested Himself strictly that way, as duality. That one became two. That one light took on, that one lightless light, which is beyond all light, took on the expression of light, which automatically required the expression of darkness to balance it, of good and evil, of pleasure and pain, of male and female, of joy and sorrow, of love and hatred. And everything in this world is sustained by that principle of duality. And when that duality ceases, everything merges back into the spirit. It's sort of like an ocean. When you have waves on the ocean, you must automatically, necessarily, have also troughs, because the production of a wave doesn't change the level of the ocean. So the raising of the level of the ocean here necessarily requires a lowering, a compensating lowering of the ocean over here, which ultimately cancels out and leaves the same level of the ocean everywhere. And so it is that this one Spirit, who is manifested as all things, could only do so if, by seeming to move this way here, He had to seem also to move this way here to balance it out. Every plus has a minus. There isn't any joy that you can experience through the emotions as opposed to the joy of the soul. There isn't any satisfaction, any fulfillment, any success, any plus of any kind that will not necessarily, because such is the law, have its compensating minus. Everything adds up to zero. Every person of success and popularity also has his enemies. Every moment, every day of emotional joy necessarily brings you also emotional pain. And the less ego involvement, the more quickly that law is fulfilled. And it's good because it helps you to realize that if you can remain even-minded and cheerful all the time, even-minded and cheerful, not apathetic, because that's not a spiritual state. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. But if you can feel that your joy comes from inside yourself and not from things, if you can learn not to react to things but always be complete in yourself, then you will find that all that complexity outside becomes more and more simplified automatically. It's not so much a matter of giving up things, involvements, jobs, whatever. It's a matter of more and more simplifying your consciousness inwardly, and the way to do that, of course, is to get more and more back to your own inner self. What happens in the beginning? First of all, there is that division, that basic division, which in the body, for those of you who know yoga, and I'm not going to take the time to explain it to those who don't, the Irda and the Pingala in the body. That from this basic nerve channel, which is your reactive process in the body, from this then come bifurcations again and again and again, that every time you go in any direction, there's a choice. This particular choice will take you more toward, for example, in order to give you the idea of how values in this world are relative, not absolute, although the direction is universal, but in the individual act. Supposing a lazy person were to finally, one day, after years of doing nothing at all, not like that saint who did a great deal, but on another level, this man is just a human slug, you might say. And one day he gets up and he decides, I want to become a millionaire. Everybody would applaud at least the intent. I don't think anybody would expect much results, but the wish that he has to get out there and do something would be a praiseworthy thing, because it's better than what he was doing. Now, supposing a Mahatma Gandhi woke up one morning and said, I'm sick of serving humanity, I want to go out and become a millionaire. Wouldn't everybody be disappointed in him? Wouldn't everybody say he had fallen? The same act, good in one person, bad in another. Why? Because Mahatma Gandhi is closer to a level of understanding where if you've got this position, everything lower than this position is down, and everything above this position is up. If I move my hand down, those things that are here are up now, whereas these things down here are still down. It's when people say values are relative and therefore it's every man's opinion as to what's true. This is wrong. It's a wrong understanding of a truth. The truth is that values are directional in their relativity, a point which I've made very clear in a book of mine called Crises in Modern Thought. But there are definitely, everybody on this level, wherever he may be, certain actions are right for him and wrong for him that would be right for some people because they're still higher than where they are. And so you see that at every point there is a choice. And so the bifurcations of choices become more and more multitudinous, multifarious, as you go further and further from this pristine simplicity in God, till you find that the world is a very complex place. And the more people live out of God, the more complex their lives become. I remember a philosophy that I haven't heard much about for quite a few years, but it was very popular back 25 years ago, 20 years ago. General semantics. The idea of general semantics was that you can never clearly say what you mean by merely using words that are commonly accepted. For instance, John is a good person. Well, John may be good sometimes, but he's not good always. So you have to explain that John is a good person when he's being kind. John is not a good person when he's not being kind. John was a good person in 1946. John may not have been a good person in 1948. And so General Semantics said that you should not only say this John, but also put a little figure up above it, 1946. or and I can just imagine the complexity that you would have to go through if you really wanted to say clearly what you meant on an outward level. John 19:46. Yeah, but in the morning or in the afternoon? Yeah, but which morning? John when he's with his children, or John when he's with the neighbors who have just dumped some trash over his fence? Or John when he's with the neighbors on the other side who always invite him to tea? I have seen that much of the complexity of our society today comes from thinking that you can solve it all by getting it together out here. And it just never seems to happen. It's like that delightful story of Krishna when he was a boy. All those stories of Krishna as a child are allegorical. In this one, well known to many of you, he was a mischievous little child, as any little boy of good, high energy will be, and he used to keep running into the kitchen and grabbing cheese when his mother was trying to make things. And so one day he ran in and grabbed a handful of cheese, and so she wanted to tie him to a bedpost so he wouldn't be able to disturb her in her cooking. Krishna was a child, but he was also thought of as an incarnation of God, or is now. The story is an allegory of God living in that form. And so she took a piece of string, which was quite long enough to tie him, but she found that it was that much short. And so she went and got some more string and tied a knot in it, and it was twice as long, and it was still that much short. And she got all the string in the house, just from everywhere, and it remained always that much short. And then she realized that you can't tie the infinite. You can't just do it with in an outward way. And she said, "Lord, would you please not be mischievous for a while?" And he sat quietly and didn't disturb her. But in this way, the old allegories sought to show us, to teach us, that we can't get it ever together. Everything that you try to do in order to tie it all up, so it's just exactly where you want it, in an outward way will always be that much short. You'll have it almost just as you want it, and then suddenly you find it, it isn't that, and then it all falls apart. You make a lot of money and you lose it all. You get a lot of success and you lose it all. You think, I've just got this house exactly where it wants, and you find that it leaks. And you think, but I'm so sincere, can't the water forgive me that one little hole? No, it'll find it. And so, unfortunately, does the law, until you live in God's love. But the interesting thing, which worldly people haven't understood, couldn't understand, because it doesn't make any sense. The only thing that makes it make sense is the fact that it works. And in fact, if you look at it from that point of view, practically everything we do falls into that category. How many of you understand how TV works? I'm not certainly the one to raise my hand. Yet I know that it does. I have faith that somebody knew what he was doing, because there's the results. I have no idea how that computer of mine works so that I can write books on the word processor. It still seems like magic, and I sometimes suspect that it really is. I don't know how a car works. I know that if I put the key in the keyhole, and what do I do? In the starter, the ignition, and turn this thing and propitiate the motor with the proper movements. If the motor is pleased, it will turn over. But I suspect it's all really magic. And in fact, we pride ourselves on how sophisticated we are, but we're just as subject to the hocus pocus of those engineers and inventors and so on as people in South Sea Islands were to their witch doctors. And who knows who is the greater specialist? In fact, those people knew a great deal. There was one man who told me that he was working in Mexico on a farm many years ago. And he was an Englishman. He said one of the workers was a villager from a distant village in Mexico. And he slipped off the yoke of a wagon and fell under the wheel of the cart right on his head, and it cracked his head open. He was unconscious. And a doctor was summoned, and fortunately was nearby, and he said there isn't anything that we can do for him. I don't know whether they could do something now, but this was back back in 1920 probably. At any rate, his villagers said, well, may we take him home? And the doctor said, you might as well. We'd only have to bury him here. If you want to take him back to his people and bury him there, fine. They did. 6 months later, that man walked back over those hills, and you couldn't even see where he had had the injury. The many things that so-called simple and primitive people know are things that are much more sophisticated than we know. There was a lovely little thing in Morning of the Magician of this woman in a simple backward society who, if her husband had gone to market to buy things for the family and she'd forgotten to tell him something that she needed, she would go down to the tree at the foot of their garden and call him. And somebody said, well, why do you go to the tree? But she said, well, sir, it's because we're poor. We can't afford a telephone. How she used the tree, I've no idea. But there are a lot of strange things in this world. And we don't really know how they work. And so it shouldn't bother us that much that we don't know how divine things work. The fact is, if we see that they do work, we should respect them. And indeed, it's amazing the kinds of things that happen to people once they get onto the spiritual path and begin to live more for God. Somebody was talking to me about the practical side of Ananda. Well, we try to be practical, but I said to him the most practical thing of all is faith. Because I have found that it works. It really does. That if you do something for God, you don't have to worry about the string at all. He'll somehow tie the thing up in himself. And it's amazing the extent to which he does it. I've often shared with you, but it's such a good story that I'd like to share it with those of you who are new today. The time when I went to India in 72, there was a friend of mine who was a professor, a student I should say, but he was also a professor from India, who was a specialist in agriculture, and in fact he was responsible for famous invention in that field of investigation, of study. Anyway, he was a very nice man, and after he returned to India, when he returned to India, I said that I would love to look him up, and he invited me and so on, and we were good friends. But when I got to India, I realized I didn't have his address. He lived in Bhubaneswar, which is, 300 miles maybe, 260 miles south of Calcutta in the state of Orissa. When I went to Calcutta, my one regret was that I had no idea how to find him, and so I had to give up going down to look him up. I was going to go down to Puri anyway, which was just a little bit further than Bhubaneswar. And I was, this whole trip, I didn't have Ananda to worry about, I didn't have anything to think about doing, and so I was able to just constantly, everywhere I went, have the thought of God, and just think of God and sing to God in my heart. And I landed at the airport in Calcutta, Dum Dum Airport it's called, a strange name, and rather apt sometimes I think, but anyway. And the friends that I had written that I was coming weren't there. Now, what do you normally do when somebody isn't there and you've got nowhere to go? You rush to the nearest phone and you sort of go thumbing through the book to find the number and so on. But I was thinking, no, I'm here for God and I'm here with God, and so He'll take care of me. If these people aren't here, then something else will happen. So I just stood there silently for a moment when I saw that the crowds had thinned and there was still nobody there for me. And I just, without closing my eyes, I just inwardly thought, well, God, what do you have in mind? I know you have something in mind, but what is it? Not 15 seconds later, somebody stopped in front of me and he said, what is your name? And I told him, he said, I thought it must be you. This friend of mine, the man that I'm talking about from, who was in this country at UC Davis, his name was Dr. Mishra. And he said, a friend of mine, a Dr. Mishra, showed me your photograph 2 weeks ago, and I've been longing to meet you. I had no idea that I would ever have a chance, and here you are." And I said, "And I've been longing to meet him. Can you help me to get to him, to find him?" He said, "Yes, he happens to be staying in Calcutta right now. I just landed here because I have come to see him. Come with me." Amazing! But I have seen this kind of thing happen so often that I no longer write it off as coincidence. And I found that it works the more you live in the thought of, "You're the one really doing it, God, and I'm living in you." And the more I have the thought that I've got to do it, the more he lets me go ahead and do it. But then I find that it doesn't work anyway. There's always that much short. There was the lovely lesson that Yogananda taught one of his disciples, which I've mentioned in my book, The Path. Mira Mata was watching him in the kitchen while he was cooking. And she thought, well, instead of being like Mary and just sitting, standing, whatever, and receiving the joy of being with him, which was really a tremendously powerful emanation always, instead of just listening in her soul, she was just thinking, I've got to do something. So she started washing up after him. And so he thought, well, if that's what she wants, then I'll just give her things to wash. And he dirtied pots and pans and slopped things on the floor, and she was just working harder and harder and harder and harder until finally she thought, oh, I might as well quit. I'll just wait till he's finished and then I'll wash up. And he didn't say anything. He just had a quiet smile on his face, but he stopped dirtying everything. And she understood, because she was that kind of disciple. That is to say, the disciple who watches and listens and learns. But we have to learn to listen, to watch, to absorb, to try to think, what lesson is there in this for me? What is God teaching me? And the more we think we've got to do it all, the more he thinks, all right, play your game to the finish. Most people take many incarnations, a hell of a lot of them, before they wake up. But when they do wake up, they begin to realize, no, he's the one who's really doing it. And therefore, why worry? One of the most beautiful things in the life of St. Francis of Assisi was how he accepted everything with gratitude, but everything. He would go to people's homes with a little bucket and ask them if they wanted to give him any food, and many of them gave him just garbage. And he would thank them sincerely because he thought, all right, this is what God has given me, not they've got all that wealth and they can't even think of giving me a little something decent to eat for a change like this. No, he thought, God gave this to me, and therefore if this is what God wants me to have, he had the faith in God to feel that not only was God doing it all, but God knew what he was doing. And this is really a fairly basic assumption of the devotee, but almost no devotee has it. Falls short of it many, many times. And St. Francis, from the beginning, and this is what made him such a great saint, he had that kind of loving faith, that everything came from God and therefore had to be good, because it was God's. And so he would thank those people, and he would sit at the birdside and rejoice in this swill that he was eating, saying, God, isn't this a wonderful banquet? How many of us could do that? I'm not raising my hand on this one either. I'd like to think I could do it sometimes. But the more we can do it, the more we find that everything becomes simple because he takes care of it all. You see, the more you involve yourself in things outwardly, the more not only complex does your life become, but your consciousness also. And the more you can learn to accept everything that comes to you as God's gift, the more you find you live always in joy. I had this thought just recently when I was thinking about all the pain that I went through with my separation from SRF. And when you're close to something, it's hard to see, and it occurred to me, why not say God did it all? And therefore be grateful to him, because I believe in him and I know that he knows what he's doing. Why not do that with the hardest tests that come to you? Master had a temple at Encinitas that he loved being in because it meant he could just be peaceful there by the ocean and live in the bliss of God and teach those people who wanted to come. It was a small temple, but those who came were those whom God sent. And then, because the county didn't take care of the drainage of the city water that flowed in the street there, the drainage was poor, and it undermined the temple until finally the temple collapsed. And Master wrote that poem in Whispers from Eternity after that experience, that whatever happens, I remain irrevocably yours. And I remember somebody saying to Master once, what a pity that you lost that beautiful temple. Master said it was the best thing that ever happened to me. But we need to have a positive attitude about everything, that everything is a part of the divine plan. If you accept it that way, even if it's terrible, it turns to good. Even the worst things become good. And so, simplicity is something that we can find on all levels, but it must begin in the recognition that it comes when we become more and more centered in ourselves, centered in the divine simplicity of God's consciousness. And then, on all levels, it works naturally. It doesn't work if you merely try to simplify in a negative way. You must also take up in a positive way. The more you practice Kriya, the more you love God, the more you serve God in all, the more you live in the thought that everybody is a window through which He is looking. Everybody, no matter how badly they treat you, everybody is He. The more you will come to this simplicity of which we were speaking this morning. All levels. Physically, yes, it would be good to cut down on all the things that you own, but it isn't the things that you own. It's not bad to have possessions. It's bad to be possessed by your possessions. If you're worried all the time about breaking this and losing that and having the other thing stolen, you're possessed by your possessions. If, on the other hand, you feel that, well, it's not me. I remember a psychiatrist who used to interview us all before we went to, this is when I transferred from Haverford to Brown, Joe. You were talking about Brown University. And the psychiatrist interviewed all the new students and transferees, and he took a great liking to me, and we had a mutual friend that he very much liked, and his way of saying how much he liked him was to say he's a lovely son of a bitch. But anyway, from him that was, I suppose, a compliment. And he as I say, he took a shine to me, and so he asked me about the sort of things I was interested in. He said, do you have a nice library? I bet you do. And in fact, I did. I had a beautiful library, lots of over 300 books of classics and so on. And he said, now let me ask you a question. What if somebody were to steal those books? How would you feel? And I said, well, I'd feel fine. Wouldn't matter. They're not me. He said, that's the first thing you've said that's disappointed me. And I thought, that's the first thing you've said that's disappointed me. Because in fact, he thought that it meant a lack of seriousness in my interest in those books. Whereas we can be seriously interested without being identified with these things. To have non-attachment, to feel that you are not your books, your car, your money, your possessions, your house, your clothes. You are not these. You are not your body. You are that soul in yourself. When you live that way, you know do you remember that? It was in the early editions of Autobiography of a Yogi. It's not in the present one unless they put it back. But the first edition, which is what I read, it's my favorite, there's a footnote about something that the poet Tennyson used to do. He would recite his own name as a child. And in reciting of it, he would suddenly enter a state of superconsciousness. It was as if thinking, I. He got into the essence of what it meant to be I, and then he transcended that thought of I. And he said there was no sense of ego, no sense of being separate from anybody or anything else. There was just being. It was the teaching of Ramana Maharshi. Ask yourself the question in meditation, who am I? I said to a very highly advanced disciple of Ramana Maharshi, that isn't our way. We practice something else. He said, it certainly has to be your way. Nobody can find God who doesn't do that too. In other words, you have to get down into that sense of essence. When you practice Hong So, Hong means I. Think I when you do it. Every time the breath comes in and you're watching it and you're thinking Hong, think of your I-ness as something essential rather than I as defined in terms of myself being a man or a woman, having blonde hair or brown hair or black hair, being an artist or a businessman, a success or a failure, all these traits of personality. Every time you say Hong, every time you say I, get more and more into your sense of I-ness until you'll reach a point where suddenly there isn't any I separate from anything else. It's the essence of your being, which is in everybody. Just as the essence of an island is that which ties it to the other islands and ties it to all the land masses of the world, because it's a part of the same planet. And merely because it looks separate doesn't make it separate. You are not separate. Your ego is separate in its outwardness, but not in its essence. In its essence, the one soul, the one Atman, animates all beings, just as in a gas burner, the same gas is animated by flame from each little jet. And so, the more you can get back into yourself, the more you can get into the essence of what you are, the more simple everything becomes. And it isn't a matter of Master had beautiful grounds, Master had a lovely organization. The Lake Shrine is one of the loveliest places I've ever seen, and Encinitas is also beautiful. Mount Washington too. He believed in taking good care of things. What God gives you, as Jesus also said, give back improved. Whatever you have, do well. Whatever you do, do well. Whatever you have, make it better, make it beautiful. It would be lovely to make this gradually into a wonderful garden. But the thing is, for God, not for anything else. To do it for God, to do it because it's a part of the divine flow, and inwardly don't feel that it's yours. Don't feel that the work you're doing is yours, or you'll ruin it all anyway. Nobody without that harmony inwardly can produce true harmony outwardly. This choir director of many years was so amazed at our choir and how good it was, and they had been singing together as a choir. I said that they had been rehearsing, but what was really the case is that they had been singing together as a choir 1 month, and they were that good, because there was the harmony inside that expressed itself also outwardly. And George, I don't think he'd ever done choir directing before, it certainly wasn't a major activity of his, yet he fell into it naturally because he got into the flow. The more you feel in that flow, the more everything that you do works without difficulty, without effort. And the amazing thing is that it may work without your actually doing anything at all. Because the more you make yourself a channel for God, the more you find Him taking over. So that just a little touch and a great deal is accomplished. One little word and lives are changed. And so on a physical level, it would be good indeed to simplify your lives. To simplify them by reducing your involvement, reducing your unnecessary expenditures, your unnecessary possessions, and so on. But more and more important is that as you become, as you reach higher and higher levels of this teaching, on an emotional level, don't react. Act from your inner self. Don't react in the sense that if somebody says something bad about you, therefore he's no good. If somebody insults you, therefore you're angry. If somebody's kind to you, then, oh, isn't he nice? Be yourself. And however they act, be yourself. Act because this is the way you feel. And if in your judgment, somebody is a very nice person, and that very nice person treats you like dirt, that's a good test for you. See whether you really feel the same way. You should be able to if you're not attached. Whatever you felt when you weren't involved should be the same thing you feel now that you are involved. In other words, don't Don't get into action and reaction in that level of consciousness which divides everything into the good guys and the bad guys, the things you like and the things you don't like, the things you want and the things you repel. See, everything is equal. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, to a Brahmin, to a wise man, everything is the same. That doesn't mean that he can't tell whether a person has blonde hair or black hair. It doesn't mean that he can't tell whether a person is tall or short. It means that he sees them all as manifestations of the same reality. And so to him, equally dear would be a dog, an enemy, because he saw that all were equally manifestations of the same light. This is to simplify the heart. A simple heart is a pure heart. When you have a simple heart, it doesn't matter what you have outside, and if you don't have a simple heart, you can be in a dungeon with nothing, and still you will get, you'll find some way of complicating your life. Perhaps if only counting the number of cockroaches every day, or who knows what. When you have a simple life, a simple heart, then you do things without motive. You don't do things because this is going to be the result. You do them because it's right. And even if it doesn't, even if it goes against what's good for you, you still do it because it's right. And you're not even tempted. It doesn't matter. I'm reminded of that man who came here back years ago when we had nothing at all. And he said, I have $200,000, which I would be happy to put into the community if you think this is where I belong, but tell me where I belong. And I said, I think you belong in India. And any practical person, self-labeled practical, would say you're an absolute nut. Here's somebody's offering to build your community is what it would have amounted to, and we were at our beginnings and had nothing, and you're telling him to leave. But I felt that's where he belonged. Why not tell him that? God takes care of us. It's not this person with $200,000 who's doing it. The more you can live in simplicity of heart and say that God is taking care of me, and what he gives, I'll do my best, but after that, it's his. And if he wants me to fail, all right, then even that can be my success, that I accepted failure gloriously, joyfully in him. And the more you live that way, the more you find that it actually works. Somebody said to Master in the early years of Mount Washington, who was very supercilious, he said, what are the assets of this organization? Master replied joyfully, none, only God. In fact, it was true at the time. They were eating tomatoes off the hillside, and that's about all they had to eat. But the more you live that way, the more you find that God takes care of you. And the more you live thinking, I've got to do it, you find at the end of life, everything is a balance. And cheerful. Because when you have this good cheer inside, nothing can touch you. When you live in the thought of God, nobody can harm you. And then simple thoughts. To simplify the thoughts, don't get involved in too many things. Make your mind peaceful. You don't have to worry about how it's all going to turn out. The more you live on a calm level, the more you're living on a higher level. And when you're living on a higher level, the more power there is to your thoughts. And automatically those thoughts become manifested in the things that you do. So that with just a little movement, suddenly things are falling into place that all the running in circles never brought into place. You will find that when your mind is clear, when your mind is concentrated, when it's simple, then things work without you're having to do very much about them. The thought is in the ether and it touches other people and they all come and they too help. And it's amazing how these things happen, because just like TV to most of us, this law is something that we can't see how it works. But if you study the lives of people who have lived it, you find that it does work. It's the most practical thing around because it's the only thing that works. And finally, on a soul level, the more you meditate, the more you live, not only with clear, simple thoughts, straightforward thoughts, without personal motive, but just with a guileless heart is what I was talking about. The more you live, not only with all of that, but just in the thought of God, that is to say, meditate deeply and keep His consciousness with you in everything that you do, the more you will see that your life simplifies itself. So that you don't really need to do that much in order to achieve simplicity, as long as you're achieving the prime simplicity of all. The closer you come to Him, the more everything becomes simplified. Our subject this